Hey all, and welcome back to Digger Gaming. Today we're taking a look at the cultural identity of the Digger, specifically the unit in which Australian and New Zealand forces forged a strong bond and proved ourselves as a capable modern fighting force. As the video is quite long, we'll be covering this in two parts. The name of the video is Gladiators from World War II, the ANZACS, and as always, the original video will be posted down below, as well as my Discord, Twitch and Facebook. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Right, just quickly before we get into it, I forgot to mention my ANZAC shirt. It's a New Zealand one given to me by a New Zealand infantry soldier. Thought it would be best to wear it on something like this, so yeah, let's start it. Looks quite well professionally done. Hopefully we don't get flagged. So it looks like it must be a whole series on different units. One last thing before we get into it, the ANZACs weren't actually forged in World War II, it was World War I itself, but I'm sure we'll probably hear about that in this doco as well, so let's go.
When Britain went to war against Nazi Germany in September 1939, her whole empire loyally followed her. From countries all over the world, men and women were taken to fight many thousands of miles from their homes for a land which they had never visited against enemies about whom they knew little. But none of them ever queried the reasons for doing so, and none proved more steadfast and gallant than the troops from two of the most remote outposts of the empire, Australia and New Zealand.
For those that are watching this for the first time and learning what ANZACs are, it's Australian New Zealand Army Corps.
Few countries contributed more proportionately, their small populations providing a ready supply of men who swiftly gained a worldwide reputation, not only as superb fighting troops.
I'll have to show you guys something. So I thought I'd just quickly show you the iconic Australian slouch hat, if I can get it in view. This is mine. It's got your unit badge on the front, 87 RBR, and my unit flash on the side. But yeah, just thought I'd give you that, and the rising sun, the iconic rising sun there. So yeah.
Superb fighting troops, but as rugged individualists. The story of the ANZACs, as these gladiators became known.
Stop that there. That's another famous Australian invention there. Looks to be the Owen gun. Similar to the Sten gun, but made in Australia.
Is one of the least told, but most stirring of World War II. A quarter of a century earlier, when Britain declared war on Germany and Austro-Hungary in 1914, Australia and New Zealand had only recently become self-governing nations. Australia in 1901, New Zealand 6 years later. Both immediately sent units to fight in Europe and against Turkey, which had joined the Central Powers. In Egypt, they were formed in...
It also sent, before we actually become a country, the States had sent troops to the Boer War and other various conflicts before World War I and before our independence.
To an Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, from which came the nickname ANZACS. During the Gallipoli campaign in 1915, the ANZACS fought as national units for the first time in their history. This searing experience first gave Australia and New Zealand a sense of their own identity as independent countries.
Yeah.
The ANZACs then fought on the Western Front in France.
Apologies to pause it so many times in quick succession, but both Gallipoli and the Western Front sort of were our first major battles as a country. We were sort of forged in fire.
France and Flanders. There they played a leading part in the final victories that ended the war in November 1918. Other ANZACS fought in Palestine, forming the main part of the Desert Mounted Corps. Their dramatic breakthroughs and advances helped to shatter the Turkish defenses. The memory of what the ANZACS had endured at Gallipoli during 1915 became a fundamental part of the identity of both countries as proudly independent nations. Australia and New Zealand were just as ready to help Britain in 1939 as they had been in 1914. Each offered to send a division of troops to take part in the war in Europe.
That's quite a lot for Australia.
But it took time to build up and train their small peacetime forces for war. Many of the men recruited were well used to a hard and rigorous life in the outback or mountains and made natural soldiers, although their attitude to traditional military discipline often left much to be desired.
Certainly did.
The 6th Australian Division eventually sailed in January 1940. Its men landed in Egypt, as their fathers had done 25 years earlier. But this time the threat came not from Turkey, but from Mussolini's Italy, with its colonies in neighbouring Libya and Abyssinia. When the Australians arrived, Italy had not yet declared war, so the division was able to continue its training, and it was soon joined by the New Zealand Division. This was commanded by General Bernard Freyberg, who had won the Victoria Cross during World War I.
It's the haka playing in the background there.
Most of his troops stayed with the Australians in Egypt, but one brigade was sent on to strengthen the forces defending Britain against German invasion.
Didn't know that.
The relaxed attitude of the ANZACS to military discipline quickly made them notorious, but the more hidebound British Army High Command could not fault their enthusiasm. They often referred to themselves as the Diggers, a term originating from the gold rushes in Australia of 100 years earlier.
We'll just say that term probably wasn't self-awarded. I think that was given to us by the British from things like the Eureka Stockade, stuff like that. We just embraced it.
New Zealand's small population of barely 2 million meant that the mobilization of a complete division stretched her resources to the limit. Whereas during the summer of 1940, the Australians were able to form another 2 divisions for home defence and send sufficient troops to the Middle East to form a 2nd division there. The 9th Australian Division came into being in Palestine at the end of the
I think
year.
it's probably important to remember not only the numbers, but as I said, proportionate to population size. New Zealand probably gave just as much, if not more, than what Australia did, and other countries during the war.
In June 1940, Mussolini finally brought Italy into the war, and the Middle East became an active theatre. The ANZACS did not take part in the early battles, as the Italians advanced cautiously into Egypt.
Motorbike cavalry.
And were then pushed back in early December 1940 by a British counterattack led by the Desert Rats of the 7th Armoured Division and the 4th Indian Division. But during a lull in the battle in mid-December, the 6th Australian Division moved forward to relieve the Indians who were being redeployed to East Africa. The ANZACS were about to have their first taste of combat.
I had a great grandpa that was a desert rat, in Tobruk, I believe. Then went to Port Moresby to go to Dakota Track, which a lot of them did.
The troops of the 6th Australian Division moved forward to begin the next stage of the British assault on the Italians at the beginning of January 1941. Their first task was to capture the Italian-held port of Bardia, just inside Libya. After a two-day battle in which 38,000 Italians surrendered, they entered it on the 5th of January. Their next objective was Tobruk, a further 90 miles along the coast.
Look at the differences in warfare. I mean, even back in World War II, one well-placed artillery round that wiped out that whole section or platoon. That was just the way they did things.
This fell on the 22nd. And the Australians then pushed a further 300 miles towards Benghazi, while the 7th Armoured Division thrust inland across the Cyrenaican Bulge to cut off the retreating Italians. Within a fortnight, a further 20,000 men, 200 guns and 120 tanks fell into British and Australian hands. It was the first Allied ground victory of World War II. And the ANZACS had played a key role, but the euphoria did not last long. Within a week of this victory, Erwin Rommel and his German Africa Corps began to land at the Libyan port of Tripoli. While Rommel prepared to attack, 6th Australian Division was relieved by 9th Australia. But the 6th had little time to rest. For British Prime Minister Winston Churchill decided to send troops from the Middle East to support the Greeks, who had been fighting an Italian invasion from Albania since the previous November.
I think mostly it was New Zealand troops that went to Greece. I think. We'll see what happens. I'm not sure.
6th Australian Division and the New Zealand Division, now rejoined by the brigade which had gone to Britain in 1940, formed part of the force. Hitler, keen to secure his southern Balkan flank for his projected invasion of the Soviet Union, invaded both Greece and Yugoslavia on the 6th of April.
It's the downfall of Hitler.
The ANZACS fought bravely, but could not hold back the German blitzkrieg. Yet they were by no means demoralized, as New Zealander Lieutenant Charles Upham, in peacetime a sheep farmer, told a BBC interviewer.
The division over here is growing from strength to strength, and the morale of our own troops is unsurpassed. You will hear more from us again.
The Royal Navy evacuated the British force, and part of the ANZACS went back to Egypt. They would soon have the opportunity to gain revenge.
One thing that really astonishes you in World War II is the amount of theatres that were open. I mean, we had North Africa, the Middle East, Greece, Italy fighting there, Soviet Union, Russia Germany invading there, Western Europe, the Pacific. It quite literally was a world war. Nowhere was really left untouched, I guess.
The remainder of the ANZACS was sent to the eastern Mediterranean island of Crete, which was the obvious next target for the Germans. Bernard Freyberg, the commander of the New Zealand Division, was put in charge of the island's defences and was convinced that the main attack would be from the sea. In reality, the Germans were planning a revolutionary airborne assault, which completely wrong-footed the British and Dominion forces. They were dispersed along the northern coastline of the island and unable to concentrate quickly enough when the German tactics became apparent.
Yeah. German paratroopers are a pretty elite force too.
German air supremacy proved crucial. And once the paratroops had secured an airfield and could land reinforcements, the issue was no longer in doubt, despite gallant resistance by the defenders. By the end of May, the Germans had secured the island, and the Royal Navy was forced to carry out yet another evacuation. During the fighting on Crete, Charles Upham, weakened by dysentery, destroyed a number of machine gun posts, almost single-handedly extricated a company that had been cut off, and repulsed numerous German attacks. He was awarded a well-deserved Victoria Cross. The disaster on Crete, following that in Greece, might have made lesser troops believe that the Germans were unstoppable. But not the ANZACS.
You see this? Good old Gertie. I dragged her 150 miles back to the coast.
But did you use her?
I'll say I did. But give old Jerry hell with it.
Yes. We're looking forward to our next date with him too.
Just let me have another crack at them. That's all I'm waiting for.
The sooner we get at them again, the sooner we'll be home. We'll give them all the works next time.
And we certainly made a mess of them this time.
Old mates haven't here.
They would soon have their opportunity, for while Greece was collapsing, Rommel had attacked in Libya and driven the British pell-mell back into Egypt. During the retreat, General Leslie Morshead, commander of the 9th Australian Division, was ordered to hold the port of Tobruk at all costs.
Yeah, this is a famous battle for Australia.
Morshead had some 31,000
And New
troops,
Zealand.
including his own division, a brigade from 7th Australian Division and a British armoured brigade. By the 11th of April, Tobruk was totally cut off. It was subjected to sustained Axis air attack, which threatened to cut off all supplies.
Just a quick side note too, this was where both British, Australian and New Zealand SAS sort of developed in these campaigns for long-range reconnaissance, hunting out, airfields and tanks and stuff like that.
Then, on the 14th of April, Rommel launched a major assault against the port. Axis forces succeeded in getting inside the Australian positions.
Africa Corps.
A series of desperate battles followed, and the Germans were eventually driven out.
It's a big bomb.
During the fighting, Corporal John Edmondson of the Australian 2nd 17th Battalion won a Victoria Cross for holding his position despite being severely wounded.
Heard this story before too.
Edmondson died of his wounds, and his posthumous award, the first of 20 to be won by Australians during the war, was received by his parents. The siege of Tobruk continued throughout the summer of 1941. The beleaguered garrison even produced its own newspaper, which did much to maintain morale. Despite the constant Axis air attacks, the Royal Navy did manage to keep the garrison supplied and evacuate sick and wounded back to Egypt. The Australians proudly nicknamed themselves the Rats of Tobruk.
Yeah.
Many lived in caves, conveniently situated close to the front line. They kept the Axis for
Pretty smart way of, I mean, that's what a lot of countries have done during a lot of conflicts, is sort of go underground, especially in this kind of warfare. Pretty
forces at
smart.
bay by dominating no man's land through aggressive patrolling. For the Allies, the Rats of Tobruk provided a beacon of hope at a desperate period in the war. The scope of the fighting in the Middle East widened during summer 1941, and the ANZACS became involved in another campaign. Fears that the Luftwaffe was about to begin operating from Vichy French airfields in Syria caused the British to invade the territory in June 1941. Among the troops taking part was 7th Australian Division and elements of the 6th Division. Australian General John Laverack was in overall command. He led the Australians, together with Free French troops and units from
Little bit of tidbit information. There's actually Laverack Barracks named after him. Yeah.
the British 1st Cavalry Division in an advance up the coastal plain. The Vichy French put up more resistance than expected, and there was some hard fighting.
Quickly pause it there and say I'm pretty sure the Vichy French were pro-German. If anyone has any more information, post it down below. But yeah, pretty sure that's how it worked. New Zealand artillery there.
Nevertheless, the overstretched Allied force pushed forward. The Australians took Damascus and then advanced towards Beirut. They occupied the Lebanese capital just as hostilities ended.
We might just pause it there for this part, as I've got to pick somewhere to pause it. But part 2 will be coming. We might have part 2 and 3. We'll see how we go for time. Just don't want to make the videos too long. But yeah, that's sort of a general introduction. Part 2 will be out soon. Cheers, guys, and thank you.